Jonathan Pierce surveyed the glittering ballroom with practiced indifference. The annual Crescent City Charity Gala was just another obligation in his meticulously scheduled life. At 36, he had built Pierce Industries into a technology empire, yet success had left him isolated behind walls of wealth and wariness. Jonathan Darling, Vanessa Rutherford, daughter of a shipping magnate, glided toward him in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. "We've missed you at the Hamptons this summer." He offered a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Business keeps me occupied." Across the room, Olivia Reed adjusted her simple midnight blue dress, a treasured find from a vintage boutique. As a journalist for the city's independent newspaper, she'd received a last-minute assignment to cover the gala when her colleague fell ill. The glitterati surrounding her represented the subjects of articles she typically wrote, not her usual social circle. "Excuse me," a waiter said, nearly colliding with her as if she were invisible. Olivia stepped aside, accustomed to blending into backgrounds. "First time at one of these?" a friendly voice asked. Olivia turned to see an elegant older woman with kind eyes. "Is it that obvious?" "I'm Grace Thornton," the woman said. "I run the literacy foundation that's benefiting tonight." "Olivia Reed, from the City Herald. I'm covering the event." "Wonderful. We need more authentic voices reporting on these functions. Too much focus on who wore what, not enough on the causes." As they chatted, Olivia noticed Jonathan across the room surrounded by admirers, yet somehow alone. She recognized him from her research. His cold reputation preceded him. "That's Jonathan Pierce," Grace noted, following her gaze. "Brilliant businessman, generous donor, but keeps everyone at arm's length." "He seems to have plenty of company," Olivia observed, as another glamorous woman touched his arm possessively. "Admirers of his bank account, mostly," Grace said.
"What?"
"A shame he wasn't always this way." When dinner was announced, Olivia found herself seated at a table far from the main stage. Jonathan, naturally, was positioned prominently with other major donors, barely glancing at anyone beyond his immediate circle. As the evening progressed, Olivia took notes, observing the performance of wealth and status around her. When she excused herself to the restroom, she accidentally took a wrong turn and found herself in a quiet hallway. There, and to a bulletin board, were photographs of children reading in a newly built library, the actual beneficiaries of tonight's extravagance. She stood transfixed, suddenly remembering why she was here. Lost? Jonathan's voice startled her. He had apparently sought a moment's escape as well. "Just admiring the real purpose behind tonight's event," she replied softly. He glanced at the photos, then at her, his eyes registering nothing of interest before he turned and walked away. And now, the MC announced as desert plates were cleared, "We have a special presentation about the impact of our literacy initiative." Grace Thornton approached the podium, but instead of beginning herself, she gestured toward the back of the room. "Our next speaker can share firsthand the difference these programs make." Olivia felt a gentle push from the event coordinator. "You're up, Ms. Reed." "What?" "No, I'm just covering the event," she whispered frantically. "Ms. Thornton said you agreed to share your story," the coordinator insisted, before she could protest. Further, Olivia found herself walking toward the stage, her mind racing. Grace had misunderstood their conversation about how literacy programs had changed Olivia's own childhood in the foster system. Jonathan stifled a yawn, absently checking his watch. Another predictable speech was coming. He barely noticed when. The young woman in the simple blue dress took the stage, the same forgettable woman he'd encountered in the hallway. Olivia took a deep breath, facing the sea of expectant faces. She had two choices: flee in embarrassment or embrace the opportunity to advocate for something that mattered. With resolute calm, she chose the latter. "Good evening," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "My name is Olivia Reed. I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight, but perhaps that's fitting, as the best chapters of our lives often begin unexpectedly." Something in her tone made Jonathan look up. "At age 8, I couldn't read," she continued. "Not because I lacked intelligence, but because instability and poverty had created gaps in my education that seemed insurmountable. Literacy program, much like the one we're supporting tonight, changed the trajectory of my life. as she spoke. Her initial nervousness transformed into passionate eloquence. She didn't simply recite statistics. She painted vivid pictures of how books create bridges from desperation to possibility. Her authenticity resonated through the ballroom as she described her journey from fostered child to journalist. Tonight, we're not just raising money for books, we're voting for human potential. For futures that otherwise might never unfold. Jonathan found himself transfixed. Where had this woman been hiding? Her unpretentious appearance had rendered her practically invisible among the artificial beauty surrounding him. Yet now she commanded the room with natural grace that made everyone else seem shallow by comparison. When she finished speaking, silence held for 3 heartbeats before erupting into the most genuine applause of the evening. Even the typically reserved donors rose to their feet. Returning to her seat, Olivia felt a curious sensation, dozens of eyes following her movement, including the penetrating gaze of Jonathan Pierce. For the first time that evening, he truly saw her as the event concluded and donation pledges were announced. Jonathan doubled his planned contribution, requesting it be specifically directed toward expanding the literacy program Olivia had described. Later, as guests began departing, he found himself searching the thinning crowd for the woman in blue. He spotted her near the exit, deep in conversation with Grace Thornton. "Ms. Reed," he said, approaching them. "Your speech was unexpected." Olivia smiled, neither flustered nor impressed by his attention. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Sometimes the unexpected carries the most truth." 3 days after the gala, Olivia sat at her desk, finishing her article when her editor approached. "You've got a visitor, Reed. Says it's about your gala piece." She looked up to find Jonathan Pierce standing in the newspaper's modest office, looking thoroughly out of place in his tailored suit, heads turned throughout the bullpen. "Mr. Pierce, this is surprising," she said, rising to greet him. "I read your draft article," he replied. "How? It hasn't been published yet." "I have resources," he said simply. "You were quite critical of the performative philanthropy, as you called it." "I was honest," she countered. "Isn't that why you're here? Because unlike everyone else, I don't pander to wealth." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Actually, I'm here because you mentioned expanding your coverage of literacy initiatives. I'd like to offer you exclusive access to document the programs my foundation is developing." This wasn't what she expected. By me specifically. "Your perspective is valuable," he admitted reluctantly, "and authentic." Their collaboration began professionally enough. Twice weekly meetings at his office to discuss the foundation's work. Olivia maintained a careful distance, determined not to become another person dazzled by his wealth. "These program metrics look impressive," she noted during their 3rd meeting. "But have you actually visited any of the community centers yourself?" Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. "I have people who handle the field work." "Of course you do," she murmured, disappointment evident. The following week, she arrived for their meeting to find Jonathan waiting with his driver. "We're going to the Riverside Center today," he announced. "You're right. I should see the actual implementation." At the community center in the city's poorest district, Jonathan stood awkwardly while children rushed to greet Olivia, who volunteered their monthly. She helped a small boy sound out words, her face alight with genuine joy. "Ms. Olivia, is that your boyfriend?" the child asked, pointing at Jonathan. She laughed. "No, Tyler. That's Mr. Pierce. He's the man whose company pays for our books." The children surrounded Jonathan with curious questions and sticky hands. His initial discomfort gradually gave way to genuine interaction. Later, walking back to the car, he said quietly, "You're different here than in our meetings." "This is who I've always been," she replied. "Perhaps you're just finally paying attention." Over the following weeks, Jonathan found himself sharing more of his personal world with Olivia, not his wealth, which didn't impress her, but his ideas, his frustrations, his vision. "Why did you become a journalist?" he asked during a casual lunch. "To tell stories that matter," she answered. "Stories that might otherwise go untold." "And what's my story from your perspective?" he asked, suddenly vulnerable. Olivia considered him thoughtfully. "Still being written, I think." "The question is whether you'll be the author or just a character moved by external forces. Words lingered with him long after they parted that day. Rain pounded against the windows of Jonathan's penthouse as he paced restlessly. 6 weeks had passed since the gala, and Olivia Reed had systematically dismantled his carefully constructed defenses without even trying. His phone rang. "Hello, Jonathan?" Her voice sounded strained. "I'm sorry to bother you, but our community center is flooding. The children's books, the computers, everything's at risk. I'll send a team immediately," he promised. "No time," she countered. "We need hands now. Bring towels and mops if you're coming." 30 minutes later, his driver pulled up to the center. Jonathan stepped out in jeans and a simple sweater, clothes. His assistant had been shocked to discover he owned. Inside, Olivia directed volunteers. Her hair pulled back messily, clothes soaked as they fought to save the center's resources. She looked up in surprise when Jonathan rolled up his sleeves and asked, "Where do you need me?" They worked side by side for hours. When the immediate crisis passed, they sat exhausted on the center steps, watching the rain. "Yourself?" she asked. "You could have sent people." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, because you would have. Something shifted between them that night, a recognition of shared values. Beneath their different exteriors, the following weekend, Jonathan invited Olivia to his family's lake house, not the massive main property, but a small, weathered cabin at the edge of the estate. "My grandfather built this," he explained, as they walked the wooded path. "He started Pierce Industries from nothing. When I was a boy, he would bring me here to remind me that wealth wasn't our family's beginning." "What happened to that perspective?" she asked gently. Jonathan's expression darkened. "My parents died when I was 22. Suddenly I was responsible for thousands of employees, shareholders, an entire legacy. I built walls to protect it all." "And yourself," Olivia added. "Perhaps," he conceded. "What about you? What walls have you built?" She smiled sadly. "Mine keep people from getting close enough to leave. Foster care teaches you that attachment leads to abandonment." This evening approached. They sat beside the lake, pretenses fully abandoned. "My article series is nearly complete," Olivia said. "Quietly?" And then he asked, suddenly afraid of her answer. "And then we decide if what's growing between us exists beyond the context of work." She replied honestly. He reached for her hand. "I've never known anyone like you, Olivia. Someone who sees the real me and still chooses to stay." "I haven't decided to stay yet," she reminded him with a gentle smile, "but I'm considering it." 3 months after the gala, Jonathan stood nervously in the community center auditorium. The grand reopening banner hung proudly across the newly renovated space, not just repaired from the flood damage, but completely transformed with expanded facilities. "Stop fidgeting," Olivia whispered beside him. "Your speech will be fine." "I'm not worried about the speech," he replied. "I'm worried about what comes after." Before she could question him, Grace Thornton called him to the podium. Facing the crowd of children, parents, teachers, and community members, Jonathan spoke not from prepared notes, but from his heart. 6 months ago, I would have sent a check and a representative to this event, he began candidly. I would have considered that sufficient participation. But someone remarkable showed me that true impact requires presence, not just resources. His eyes found Olivia's in the audience. "This center represents more than literacy. It represents possibility, connection, the courage to be seen authentically and to truly see others." After the formal ceremony, as children explored the new facilities, Jonathan led Olivia to the small reading garden created in the center's courtyard. "There's something I need to say," he began, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain. "That's unusual for a man who owns a media empire," she teased. "Olivia," he said seriously, "before you, I measured worth in profits and possessions. I saw people as functions, not souls. I was surrounded yet completely alone, and now," she asked softly, "now I understand that true wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. Not what you accumulate, but what you build together." Took her hands in his. "I'm not offering you my fortune. I'm offering you my heart if you want it." Olivia's eyes glistened. "I fell in love with Jonathan who mops floors during floods and reads to children, not Jonathan the billionaire." "They're the same person now, thanks to you," he said. I don't want to be the man who ignored the most beautiful soul in the room ever again. Is this a proposal? She asked, with an arched eyebrow. It's a beginning, he answered. The first chapter of a story I hope will be very long. Behind them, a small voice interrupted. Ms. Olivia, is he your boyfriend now? Tyler, the young boy from the center, looked up at them curiously. Olivia glanced at Jonathan, her eyes full of promise. What do you think, Tyler? Should he be, yeah? The child exclaimed. He reads the voices in stories almost as good as you. Dude, Jonathan laughed, the sound free and unburdened. High praise indeed. As they walked hand in hand through the center, surrounded by the community they both now served, Jonathan realized the transformation was complete. The walls that had once protected his isolation had become foundations for something far more valuable. A life defined not by wealth or status, but by authentic connection and shared purpose. And Olivia, who had never sought to be seen by society's elite, found herself truly seen by the one person who had learned to look beyond the surface. Their love story wasn't about physical beauty that captured attention, but about the perfect beauty of authentic hearts finding their perfect match.